Hello, hello, Sarah of SEK Handmade here. And I assume that if you are here, you have read the topic and you're ready to have a hard conversation. This is this is an unpopular thing to talk about. I will tell you, this is one of those things that I've maybe chatted about with close friends. But it is not something that I see being discussed in the broader yarn community. Now, is this as wildly important as social justice? No. We are talking about hard things in the yarn community, but this is something that I think deserves some attention. And it's not being said. And I think the reason that people don't want to talk about this are twofold. If you are a designer, no designer wants to say, hey guys, I have this great pattern, but it's really not for everybody. No marketing person ever told you to say, this is only going to work for a few people. And I'm not saying that any pattern can't work for anyone, but I am saying that not every pattern is going to work for everyone. Does that make any sense? We'll talk about it a little more here in just a minute. The other thing is, I feel like there's some shame around purchasing supplies, right? If you purchase yarn for an entire garment, unless you are a very small person, you're purchasing a significant quantity of yarn. I cannot make any type of garment for myself without several hundred yards of yarn. I'm trying to think. I knit a tank top a couple summers ago, and I don't remember exactly how much yarn I used, but I know I used Kobu, and I know I used at least, I'm gonna go out on a limb, and I'm gonna say 5 balls of Kobu, which is significant. That's way more than a hat or a cowl. So there's a big money investment, but then also there's a big time investment. I shouldn't say any. Most garments are going to take you a significant amount of time to make. And if you invest the time and you invest the money, there is, for me, and I think a lot of people, a feeling of shame to get to the end and say, I don't like this. Now, I know that I put the title of this video to be why you hate your handmade garments. And I mean, if you know me, you're not surprised that that's a little dramatic, but I don't think it has to go that far to be a problem, because no matter if you put it on and you're like, I hate this, or you put it on and you're like, I'm a little disappointed. Or if you put it on and you're like, I mean, I could take it or leave it. None of those are feelings you want to be having around something that you've spent hours and hours working on. So even if the word hate feels too intense for you, I encourage you to change that to disappointed, or whatever you might be feeling when you finish a handmade garment and you're like, if I had picked this up off the rack, I would not have purchased this. So I want to talk about this a little bit, because shame causes us to hide things away, right? When we feel shame around something, we just want to like curl in and not tell anyone about it and hope that no one else notices, out of fear that other people then are going to judge you, right? For, in this case, not being able to do it correctly to figure out how to make that garment be something you love. And when I started thinking about all the reasons that people don't care for their handmade garments and all the mistakes that could go into creating something that you don't really love. And then on the flip side, all the knowledge you need to have to make the best choices, to make the best garments. It's significant. So you should not feel shame around the fact that you picked up a garment pattern with limited knowledge. I mean, that's what being a beginner is. Even if you are an advanced crocheter, if you are a beginning garment maker, you could have been making blankets and hats and mittens for years. A sweater, a cardigan, a dress. I've seen people are doing like shorts and pants now. That blows my mind because that's a whole different level of fitting your body. The knowledge that goes into making a garment that fits you really well is not the same exactly as a cowl that you just throw over your head and the fit is the fit, or a shawl that like it's so many the wingspan is so far and that's what everybody gets. So I really don't want people to feel shame over the fact that they don't magically have all this knowledge to make a gorgeous garment that fits them perfectly. And so what do they say? The first step to fixing a problem is acknowledging that there's a problem. And so I want to acknowledge that you are not alone if you have made a garment and hated it, or were just disappointed, or even mildly lukewarm about it. You are not alone. And you are not alone if you are too scared to try to make garments because you don't want to put the time and the money in to end up with something you don't like. You are not alone, and there's no shame in either of those things. So in an effort to move from shame and hiding away or never attempting a garment because of fear, I want to talk about first some of the reasons that I see. I mean, this is not comprehensive. These are reasons that I see as to why, and things I've experienced as to why you make a handmade garment and you just don't care for it. Good news, this video is not going to be the solution to all of your problems because, as I said before, this is an extensive topic, but we are going to get into it because I want to talk today about what's potentially going wrong, and just having that knowledge and thinking through those things, I think, will help you make better choices in the future. But then we're also going to go down the rabbit hole of all the little things that you can do and things you can learn about to make garments you love. Because the reality is that there are lots of wonderful things out there. And there are people out there making entire handmade wardrobes and loving all of the pieces they have. But it takes some knowledge. And so I'm here to help with that. All right. So we're starting out with a tough one. And I hope you'll stick with me. And I hope you'll realize that this is said in love and out of my own personal experience. I'm going to say the first reason that you are not loving your handmade garment is unrealistic expectations. All right. This can come in many forms, but let's start by talking about the fact that if you are comparing your handmade garment to something you would walk into the store and buy, you are often comparing, I was going to say apples to oranges, but let's be honest, it's like broccoli to apples. It's hand making a garment and buying a garment off the rack are incredibly different. And that is good and bad. So let's talk about what you buy off the rack. If you walk into a store and you pick up a sweater, oftentimes, well, not oftentimes, you are not picking up a handmade garment. If you have searched for someone to make you that beautiful color work knit sweater you saw the pattern for, but you don't know how to knit, and you've looked at prices of what it would cost for someone to make that for you, you know that no one is selling that for $20 or $50 or $100. Like, to have an intricate handmade garment is extremely expensive. So when you go into a store, what you are picking up is machine made. It is not person made. And it's machine knit. Let's be honest about that. Something that I think is important to know, because I didn't know previously, you can machine knit, but there is no machine crochet. So if you see something in a store and you think it's crocheted, it's either not crocheted, which, being someone who has a foot in both the knitting and the crocheting world, there are lots of ways that knitting and crochet can mimic each other. So even if it looks crocheted, it probably is not crocheted. And if it is for sure crocheted and it is being sold in mass, like if you're going to a store, I'm not going to call anybody out here. I debated, but I'm not going to. If you walk into a store and they have hats and you know for sure that they are crocheted, those are hand crocheted. And so if they're selling them for $20 a piece, you know as a crocheter that whoever crocheted that is not being paid what they should be to make that, to have made that hat. So the point being that mass produced sweaters are made by machines. So you are not a machine, though some may expect you to be. You are not a machine. And the simple humanness that goes into a handmade garment is a wonderful and beautiful thing, but it also means that it's going to be different than what you buy at the store, especially if you're crocheting and not knitting. If you do both, then you know that knit fabric and crochet fabric can be very different. And though there are crochet stitches that can mimic knitting stitches, the fabric that they create is not the same because they're not created in exactly the same way. So, so to go to say, oh, I saw this sweater at the store, and then I saw a pattern that looks similar, I'm going to make it and have the expectation that what I make will be exactly like what I saw at the store. That's an unrealistic expectation every time. My mom, I told my mom she needs to start watching these because I talk about her. My mom has this sweater that she bought years ago. She loves, she's worn it so much that she's started wearing through it. And it's a store-bought sweater. And so she started talking to me about the fact that she wants to remake the sweater, but hand make it. And so we had lots of discussions about how her handmade sweater was not going to be the same as the store-bought sweater. Starting with the fact that store-bought sweater was made out of a lace weight yarn, and she was hoping to make hers out of a worsted weight yarn. Those are just different. Even if you're using the same stitches, that discrepancy in yarn weight makes a big difference. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Okay, the other unrealistic expectation I think people come into handmade garments with is the fact that your made garment goes on your body, not on the designer's body. So I can see a designer, and I see designers who have very different body shapes than me. They can be very tall and very slender, and they may put on a boxy crop top and be like, and I may look at them and think, wow, that's amazing. I would like to look like that in that sweater. I can make that sweater exactly like the designer did and put it on my body, and it's not going to look the same because I do not have the same body. We'll get into tips about how to better pick patterns in another video, but I want you to think twice about the people you're seeing wearing the garment and how their body and preferences differ from yours, and how your expectation of fit might be unrealistic when you are taking the fit of the garment on their body, which is very different than yours. The other thing I want you to consider is that I want you to think the last time you went into a store, a clothing store, with a specific need in mind. I feel like it's one thing if you're just like browsing and you don't really need anything, and so like you pick up the one thing and you're like, that's kind of cute. But I want you to think about like the last time you needed a new pair of dress pants, or you needed a nice sweater for work or church or a trip or something like that. How many sweaters did you take into the dressing room and try on before you found the one or the two? If you're like me, it's a lot. And so essentially what you're doing if you're hand making a garment without putting a lot of forethought and consideration into it, is you're making a garment and then you're like taking it to the dressing room. And so the likelihood that you're going to put that on and go, ugh, is percentage wise, it feels pretty high. So, so to think that you're going to make a garment without, I'm not saying it's impossible to make a garment and love every garment you make, but to make a garment to the exact specifications of the pattern and expect to love it every time feels like a pretty unrealistic expectation when you take 30 things into the dressing room and come out with one. So unrealistic expectations. That's the hard love. If you've made it with me this far, you've made it through the tough talk here. You got to check your expectations, and I have to check my expectations. I don't know how many times I've looked at a pattern and thought, oh, that's gorgeous. I'm gonna go get that, and then thought, whoa. Let's look at that again, because there are lots of styles that I would love to love that when I put them on my body, I don't love. I don't love them. That's all there is to it. What I'm absolutely not saying is that there are certain things that can only be worn by certain body types, or that a garment that looks good on someone who's tall and thin can't look good on someone who's short and bustier. What I'm saying is it's a matter of personal preference and knowing what you want and applying that to your choices. we'll talk more. We'll talk more about that. There's some things to unpack about that. But I'm going to try to keep this video under 5 hours. So we're not going to unpack all the things. So I'm going to leave it at that. Okay. The next reason you might be making a garment and then hating it at the end is you're using the wrong tools. Okay. Raise your hand or give me a heck yes in the comments if you have picked up a pattern that says worsted weight yarn and you've gone to your shelf and grabbed a worsted weight yarn and done a gauge swatch 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 and you still can't meet gauge. Friends, yarn is like jeans. Yarn is like jeans. Yarn are like jeans. Sizing of yarn is like sizing of jeans. That makes sense. You know very darn well that you can be a 10 in one brand of jeans and a 12 in another brand of jeans and a 14 in another pair of jeans. It is not as standard as they make it seem. We'll talk more about that in my Swatch and Learn series, which I'll link to the playlist for Swatch and Learn if you want to get in on that. But if a designer uses a worsted weight yarn and you use a worsted weight yarn, there could be a significant difference in the actual wraps per inch or the weight of the yarn. I'm debating. I think, okay. You know what? I changed my mind. Okay. I'm thinking of a Lion brand yarn, and it's called Basic Stitch. They have two Basic Stitch. They have a premium and one is called premium and one is called anti-pill, I think. Don't hold me to it. Now I'm second guessing myself. One of them, if you put them together and hold them up next to each other, they are both worsted weight yarns. They're both the same line of yarn by the same manufacturer, right? But if you put them up next to each other, one of them leans a little more towards DK. It's significantly finer than the other one. The other one is more of what I'd call a kind of a classic worsted and is fluffier and fatter. If I made the same garment with those two different yarns, myself, same person, same tool, same pattern, those garments would be different because of the yarn weight and the variety of the general naming, sorry, words are hard, the general naming of worsted, so again, not going to get too deep into that. We'll talk about that in another video. The other thing that makes a huge difference is fiber content. So if a designer is making a sweater with a merino wool and you are making it with acrylic, they can have similar qualities, but they can also have significantly different qualities. And so to say, I'm going to take a pattern where a designer has used a merino wool and I'm going to make mine out of acrylic and they'll be the same, is a pretty unrealistic, back to unrealistic expectations. It's not likely that they'll be exactly the same. There are some acrylic yarns that have great drape to them, but typically a natural well, an animal fiber will behave differently than a natural fiber like a cotton or a bamboo, that will behave differently than man-made fiber like an acrylic or a nylon. So fiber content can make a big difference to how your garment fits and the drape of the garment. And the drape is just simply how the fabric moves. So you can have a very stiff drape or you can have a very flowy, loose drape. Typically, we try to lean more towards the flowy and loose. The other thing about using the wrong tool is you could just be using the wrong craft completely. So if you see a sweater, if you love knit sweaters, if you love a knit sweater, you go to the store, you buy a knit sweater, and then you're going to crochet yourself a sweater, you need to be realistic about the fact that crochet stitches tend to be, I'm trying to think of a nice word. They're thicker than a knit stitch. And so crochet fabric tends to be thicker. When I design a pattern, I have a couple patterns that I've done in knitting and crocheting. To get the fabric to be the same, knitting always goes up a yarn weight. So if I crochet something in a worsted weight yarn, to make it match in knitting, I knit it in a bulky weight yarn. So if you love a fingering weight knitted sweater and you're going to crochet that, it's going to be very difficult to get it to match your expectations. The other thing is Tunisian crochet. There's a lot of designers making kind of faux knit items with Tunisian stitches. And the reality of Tunisian crochet is that it creates a very thick fabric. That has a lot of utility and is super wonderful. I have a sweater that is Tunisian crochet and it looks like it's knit because it used the knit stitch, but man, it is a cold weather sweater because when you work the stitches and then work that return pass, you're making a very thick fabric. And so even though the yarn I chose has nice drape, it's definitely a thicker fabric than if I had just knit the sweater in the same yarn. So you may be using the wrong tools. The other thing is you might be using the wrong pattern. We kind of went into this a little bit, and this has a lot to do not with the fact that there are bad patterns and good patterns, though we certainly all have preferences for what we would like in a pattern. But I'm talking about choosing the right pattern for your personal preference mostly. And not just like it has, guys, I made, why I do this to myself, I don't know. I test crocheted a sweater. It had cables. I had never done cables before. There was no tutorial about how to do cables. And months later, I made a bracelet that was more designed to teach people how to do cables. And I did them wrong in my sweater. And so I have an entire sweater with cables done incorrectly because the pattern didn't share that. And I did not find the right information as I was trying to learn. So if you're doing something new, one of the things you may look for is a pattern that really steps things out for you. But what I mean by this is you can look at a sweater and say, that's a pretty sweater. But if you're someone who goes to the store and always buys a V-neck and that sweater is a crew neck, you might make that sweater and hate it just because it's a crew neck. So it's important to think about your personal preference. You may go to the store and always have purchased a raglan sweater. or a circular yoke sweater, and the sweater you see that you try to make has an inset sleeve, and that may be the thing you hate about it. That means you were making the wrong pattern, because there are patterns out there with a V-neck. There are patterns out there that are raglan. But if you hadn't ever really thought through those preferences, you can very easily purchase the wrong pattern. The other thing to consider is, I know it's extremely tempting to say, I want a simple garment. But if what you wear and what you prefer is not made with simple construction, you can make that simple garment and hate it. So if a pattern has no shaping to it, if it's just squares, and you don't like to wear garments that are shaped like that, the likelihood that you are not going to enjoy or wear that garment once you're done is a lot higher. Oh man, let's talk about ease. We're not going to go into this deep, but I do want to just mention this. Ease is, so much preference goes into how much ease you want in a pattern. That just means how closely the fabric is to your actual measurements. So let's say I'm just going to make something up. Let's say you have a 36-inch bust and you like things to be a little more fitted to your body. If a pattern has 10 inches of ease, that means that the final measurement, bust measurement of the garment is going to be 46 inches. That is significant. So knowing the ease of the pattern and knowing your preference for ease, if you like big, billowy, flowy things, put it on the ease. But if you like fitted things, or you need that sweater to go under a jacket or another sweater, you may even want negative ease, which means it's going to hug your body a little bit. But if you've got the wrong amount of ease to your preference, there's no wrong answer to ease. It's all a matter of preference. But if you've got the wrong amount of ease for your preference, then you're not going to like your final result. The last reason a pattern can be wrong is that you didn't modify it at all. I know, especially when you begin, it's scary to modify patterns. And we're going to talk about, in another video, we're going to talk about some of the simple ways that you can make modifications. And there are some very simple ways that you can make modifications to a pattern to make them more to your preference. So if you are making a pattern just exactly how it is, you are definitely running the risk of it not turning out the way you had hoped. All right, the last reason you may be hating your handmade garments is gauge. Gauge, friends, it's a tricky concept. It's a really in-depth and complex topic that I plan on doing several videos about, because it is that complex. But the long and short of gauge is, with garments, the more your gauge is off, whether that's too small or too large, the more your gauge is off, the more significantly your garment isn't going to fit the way it should. So if you, and you need to be aware of that, and you need, even if you do all the gauging things right, you need to be aware that small discrepancies are then multiplied by the amount of fabric you have. If you are off by a little bit and you have a cowl that's, say 20 inches wide, and it ends up 20 and a half inches wide because you were a little off, that's not a big deal. But multiply that times the circumference of your entire body, and being a little off can make a big difference. But you can make some adjustments with the right knowledge. So we'll go deeper into a lot of these topics in other videos, because we're getting a little long here, and there's a lot to unpack on all of those things. So I would love to know in the comments below what you would like to learn more about. My mind is spinning with all of the different directions we could go, but I'd love to know what you'd like to know first. Would you like to know, and you can write anything, these are just ideas that I have. Do you want to know how to pick better patterns first? Do you want to know how to pick the best shaped garments for your body? Do you want to know more about getting the correct gauge? Do you want to know, one of my ideas is, do you want to know how to use a store-bought sweater you already own to make better choices about your handmade garments? I would love to know. Please drop me a comment so that I can help decide which direction we're going to go in first. Thank you so much for joining me today. There are going to be resources down in the comments. Not the comments, sorry. There are going to be resources in the description. So under this video, there's just like a couple lines. You can hit them more, all sorts of things under there. So go check those out. And thank you so much for joining me today. I would love it if you would subscribe, like this video, turn on reminders if you'd like to know when I do more of these videos so you don't miss out on how to make the best handmade garments you possibly can. It really can be a joy, and I really am excited to arm you with the knowledge to make the best choices possible so that you have the best chance of making a handmade wardrobe that you love. Thank you so much for joining me today, and happy crafting!